He used to laugh when I talked about my dreams. Dreams are for weekends, he'd say. Real life needs adults. I believed him. Until I learned that real life needs courage more than permission. This is how I stopped asking. People say marriages fall apart in storms. Ours didn't. It wore down like a shoreline, quietly, grain by grain, until one day I looked up and the land was different. He was good at beginnings. He could make a Tuesday feel like a celebration and a diner booth feel like a private club. He ordered for me on our second date, smiled at the waiter and said, "She'll love the salmon." I did love it. I loved being known. Looking back, I don't think he knew me. I think he enjoyed being right. We moved fast. A lease, a couch we argued about, a set of plates that chipped on the edges. The apartment was small, the kind of place where coffee and conversation blend into the same smell. He worked late. I learned the rhythm of his key in the lock, his "hey" down the hall, the kiss on my temple before he opened his laptop and kept working at the kitchen table. He liked realists, he said. Realists pay bills on time, choose neutral colors and keep their heads out of the clouds. I didn't think of myself as a dreamer. I thought of myself as a person who wanted more school, maybe a different job, maybe a window with better light. That's not a plan, he laughed, but he kissed my forehead when he said it. Affection makes doubt feel like love if you hear it enough. He had phrases he wore like a favorite jacket. Dreams are for weekends. Don't make life harder than it is. Stress is optional. I wanted to ask what he called the tightness behind my ribs when I agreed with him. Optional. I wrote lists in my phone anyway, classes, programs, numbers. When he borrowed my phone to check directions and my notes were still open, he scrolled and said, "Cute. Not cruel. Just enough to make the air heavier." I learned small lessons. How to edit stories so he stayed the hero. How to time a thought so it landed between his calls. How to put my excitement in a smaller voice so it didn't echo in the room. When I told him someone from my old department said they'd write me a recommendation if I ever applied back, he smiled and said, "You could, but you'd hate the grind. You're not built for that kind of pressure." I laughed as if he'd said I was allergic to shellfish. An easy fact. A harmless warning. The kind that saves you from yourself. He liked to run the numbers. Rent, groceries, the car. He made a spreadsheet and added my name to the top like a courtesy. "I'll take care of the money," he said. "You take care of the rest." The rest was laundry and dinners and remembering the birthdays of his coworkers' kids. "You're so good at the soft things," he'd say. I wanted to be good at the hard things too. Weekends had rules. Saturdays were for errands and resetting the house. Sunday nights were for his work prep, which meant I kept the TV low and my questions lower. If I mentioned a book I wanted or a class I'd found online, he'd tilt his head like a doctor deciding between treatments. "Make peace with the life you have," he'd say. "That's how adults stay happy." I didn't feel unhappy, I felt quiet. There's a difference. When his friends came over, I set the table and stayed out of the way of their stories. He told them about a joke from his office, a deal that almost died, an award he should have gotten. They laughed the way men laugh when they're relieved to be off the clock. One of them asked what I'd been working on. I opened my mouth. "She's deciding whether to take a class," he answered for me. "She won't. She knows herself." The room nodded like he'd paid the check. After they left, I wiped rings from the table and put forks back in the drawer. He came up behind me and wrapped his arms around my waist. "You were great tonight," he murmured. "Light. Everyone likes you when you're light." Sounded like a compliment. I went to the bathroom and washed my hands longer than necessary, as if quiet could be rinsed off like oil. The first time I stopped telling him something, it felt like betrayal. I sat in a coffee shop while he texted me a photo of a tie, asking which one worked for the presentation. I wrote back, "The navy," and then returned to the page in front of me, a course catalog on my laptop. I bookmarked it, closed it, and turned the brightness down as if the screen itself could be too loud. We had a ritual most nights. He'd ask, "What did you do today?" in the tone of someone checking a smoke detector. I'd give him the bullet points he liked. Laundry, store, dinner, call with my mother. If I added, "I read about a program that starts in the spring," he'd smile sympathetically. "You get these waves," he'd say, tapping my knee. "They pass." I started saving those waves for when I was alone. They didn't pass. They learned the walls of our home and came back when the house was asleep. He said he didn't believe in fighting. "Healthy couples don't fight," he told me. "We talk." Talking looked like me presenting a thought and him filing it under later. Later is a drawer that never opens. When I did press gently, carefully, he'd switch to soft concern. I think you're tired. Let's revisit this when you're clear-headed. I stopped pressing. You can't keep knocking on a door that keeps telling you it's a wall. I kept small things. A notebook inside a cookbook he never opened. A pen in the pocket of a sweater I only wore when he worked late. Scribbles that didn't look like plans and didn't look like poems but felt like both. Sometimes I wrote my name with my old signature, the one I used before I took his. It looked like a stranger's handwriting. It looked like my own. He believed in efficiency. I believed in days that had corners for light. He set alarms. I watched the sun move across the floor and called it time. He didn't like the plant I bought for the window because it dropped leaves. I swept them up and apologized to the plant for choosing the wrong home. On our anniversary, I made reservations at a small place that still printed menus on paper. I wore a dress that felt like me even if it wasn't his favorite color. He looked good. He always looked good. When the waiter came, he ordered the special for both of us and reached for my hand. "We've built something stable," he said, warm with wine. "I'm proud of us." I was proud of us too. But pride without room becomes a box. Later that night he said, "I'm glad you've let go of that school thing. It was a phase." I smiled in the dark because the truth is kinder in darkness. I hadn't let go. I had learned to stop speaking out loud where truths went to be corrected. I found myself apologizing for things I couldn't name. For thinking too long before answering. For wanting to be somewhere else without knowing the address. For saving an extra 20 in the back of a drawer because I liked the feeling of having a secret with the future. He called it anxiety. Maybe it was. But sometimes anxiety is just a loyal body sounding the alarm when a life doesn't fit. Once in the grocery store I reached for a magazine with a photo of a woman in a lab coat. He laughed and took it from my hands. "That's cute," he said. "You're more the creative type." He meant it as flattery. I put the magazine back and bought a notebook instead. On Sundays I changed the sheets and thought about changing other things. I watched thready sunlight move over our bed and wondered how long light would keep visiting a room where it wasn't invited to stay. He napped. I wrote on my phone and deleted it. The body keeps score, the notes app does too. He was never a villain. He was comfortable. Comfort can feel like kindness if you squint. He wanted what made him feel safe, a life without jagged edges, a wife who didn't wake the water. I wanted to believe I could be that wife without drowning out my own name. If you'd asked me then whether I was unhappy, I would have said no. Unhappy is a loud word. What I was didn't have a word I trusted yet. I was a room with furniture pushed against the door. I was a sentence missing a verb. I was fine, the kind of fine that makes your friends stop asking follow-up questions. He called me grounded. What he meant was contained. When I laughed too loud on the phone with a friend, he closed his laptop and smiled at me the way people smile at toddlers near Crystal. When I wore lipstick to the pharmacy, he said, "Who are you trying to impress?" I said, "Me." He kissed my cheek and said, "You're cute." I washed my face when we got home. The night I realized something had shifted, nothing big happened. We were side by side on the couch, the TV playing a show neither of us liked. He said without looking away, "I love that you're not ambitious. It makes life simple." It was the kindest, most dangerous thing anyone had ever said to me. I smiled, turned down the volume and listened to my own heart minute by minute. It sounded steady. It sounded awake. I wish I could say I stood up then. I didn't. I did what women do when they are still learning the difference between peace and permission. I waited. I watched. I wrote my name again in the margin of a recipe and folded the page like a promise. He mocked my dreams in a tone the world calls practical. I nodded in a tone the world calls loyal. Between those two performances, a life tried to breathe. This is where our marriage lived. In polite rooms, in careful sentences, in smiles that said of course and notebooks that said, not yet. And this is where it began to end. In the quiet space between his certainty and my silence, the space a dream needs to practice standing up. The first crack didn't sound like breaking. It sounded like an email pinging on a phone that wasn't in my hand. I was rinsing cups when his screen lit up on the counter, my name, my inbox, the subject line I'd stared at in drafts for months. "We are pleased to offer you admission." He picked it up before I could. Read fast. Blinked once. Set the phone down like a warm plate. "Cute," he said almost fond. But we can't afford your hobbies right now. Hobbies. The word slid into my shoe and stayed there. I walked on it for weeks. He didn't bring it up again. That was his favorite way to make a decision: don't argue, just don't revisit. I tried to do the same, like you try not to touch a sore tooth. I lasted one day. Then I opened my laptop at the kitchen table and typed the program name into the search bar with my heart beating in my throat. I read tuition numbers like weather reports, looked at evening sections, clicked financial aid adult learners 3 times before I let myself keep the tab open. When he came home, I closed it. Not because I was ashamed, because shame was the language we used for anything that didn't fit inside his sentences. Small rebellions began to collect in the house like notes I slid under a door to myself. A notebook tucked in the cookbook he never opened. A library card application half filled, folded in my wallet. A glass jar on the top shelf labeled for later, in pencil so light you had to tilt it to read. I told no one. Secrets are heavy until they start to keep you upright. On a Sunday, his parents took us to brunch. His mother asked the question mothers ask when they're trying to sound casual. So what's next for you, dear? I opened my mouth. He covered my hand with his. She's keeping things simple. We like our life calm. The waiter arrived. The conversation changed lanes. On the drive home, I watched power lines run parallel to the road and thought about how many straight lines it takes to fence in a life. The email sat in my inbox like an unopened gift at the back of a closet. At night, when he fell asleep, I read it again, the way you reread a letter from someone who saw you before you learned to perform. Welcome back, it said without saying it. But such a small word for a door that had been locked. I wrote to the department anyway. Would there be evening classes? Is there aid for returning students? I signed with my full name, not the married one he loved to introduce, the other one, the one that felt like speaking from inside my own chest. The next morning, a reply. Yes. No fireworks. Just a clear lane where a wall had been. His life stayed loud. Calendars, calls, the particular swagger of a man who lives in inbox 0. Mine became quiet on purpose. I woke before him and read in the bathroom with the fan on. I studied syllabi like maps and traced routes from our apartment to the campus on my phone until I could see the corners in my head. I made flashcards and hid them between towels. I practiced answers I might never have to say out loud, the way you practice saying no in a mirror before you try it on a person. Money, the excuse he liked most, became math I could do. I cut corners he didn't notice. Cheaper coffee, walking instead of riding, turning coupons into a kind of sport. I sold a pair of heels I'd worn twice, and the idea that a birthday dinner had to prove anything. The jar on the top shelf got heavier. It made a soft clink when I added to it, a sound I started to love. At the grocery store, I pressed the donate $1 to literacy button and then canceled it, not because I didn't care but because I was learning there are years when you are the one in need. At home I wrote, I'll give more later at the bottom of a page and underlined later until the word looked like a horizon. His jokes sharpened just slightly, the way knives do with use. When I mentioned a book I was reading about adult learning, he grinned. Ah, my little scholar. You'll have a cute desk in our kitchen. I smiled back because smiling was the currency we used when we didn't want to start the audit. Sometimes I tried honesty in tiny doses, like medicine you test on your tongue. I'm thinking about going to the orientation. He didn't look up from his laptop. Wear comfortable shoes, he said. It's a long walk back to reality. I laughed like it was a good line. Then I went to our bedroom, closed the door, and circled the orientation date on a printed calendar I kept folded in a sweater drawer. The circle wasn't big. It didn't have to be. It was for me. Danny, the girl at the cafe I'd started visiting in the afternoons, wore chipped black nail polish and had the kind of laugh that made strangers look up. We became familiar the way people do when they occupy the same hours. You always have that serious face, she said once. What are you building? A spine, I wanted to say. Just a habit, I answered. She took my photo with a film camera and said, look at you actually existing. When she showed me the print a week later, I saw it too, not joy, not even relief. Just a woman who had stopped bracing for correction. On campus, I walked like a tourist, slow, reverent, pretending to be lost so no one would ask questions I wasn't ready to answer. I found the building with my department's name on it and read the bulletin board like it might speak. Returning adults welcome. Evening section added. Write it down before you forget. I bought a cheap notebook from the bookstore with gold letters that said begin. At the register, the clerk said, good choice. I wanted to tell him that some compliments are ladders. At home that night, I slid the Begin notebook under the mattress on my side. I slept better than I had in months. Group dinners returned like weather. He poured wine, told work stories, cast me as the calm in his storm. Someone asked what I'd been up to. I felt his hand on my knee under the table, not possessive, just a reminder of the script. Keeping us organized, he said brightly. She's great at the soft stuff. I smiled. The smile cost me less than it used to. After they left, he leaned in the doorway watching me stack plates. You were perfect, he said. Light. You always know how to be light. I'm practicing being heavy, I said without turning around. He laughed. Don't be weird. I wasn't weird. I was solidifying. I made one phone call that changed nothing and everything. Hi, I'm a returning student, I told the financial aid office. I'm working part-time. I can't take on loans bigger than I can carry. The woman on the line said, we can start small. You can build. I wrote build in the margin and drew a box around it like it was the first brick. He liked to measure love in acts of service. I learned to measure mine in acts of truth. When he asked, can you move your study stuff? It clutters my head. I moved it and didn't apologize. When he said, you're not really a school person, I kept washing the pan and didn't take the bait. When he said, we work because we want the same things, I heard the part he didn't say, as long as what you want is what I want. The day before orientation, I taped a map of campus inside a folder labeled recipes and slid it back on the shelf. My hands shook, not from fear of him, from fear of failing, of being wrong about myself, of cracking a life that at least didn't leak. That night I ironed a shirt I hadn't worn in years, plain, clean, the color of decisions. He watched a game, shouted at a screen, asked if I'd seen his navy tie. I found it for him. I was good at finding things. It was time I found myself. After he fell asleep, I stood at the kitchen sink with the lights off and the window open. The city breathed. Somewhere a siren threaded its way through blocks. Somewhere a child laughed too late for a school night. I placed my palms flat on the counter and felt how steady the house wasn't. Then I whispered the sentence I'd been practicing in doorways and mirrors, the one that didn't need his permission to be said. I'm going anyway. I didn't know what would happen next. Cracks don't promise collapse, sometimes they promise light. But I knew morning would come, and I knew which shoes I'd wear, and I knew that if he called it a hobby again, I wouldn't waste time correcting his vocabulary. Language belongs to the loudest person in the room. Reality belongs to the one who shows up. I turned off the faucet, dried my hands, and slid the orientation letter into my bag. It made a thin, confident sound against the zipper, the sound paper makes when it remembers it can be a passport. Outside, a breeze lifted the curtain and let the night in. I let it stay. For the first time in a long time, I decided what belonged in my house. Morning arrived like a verdict I had already accepted. I woke before the alarm, before the light, before any noise that might try to talk me out of what I'd decided. The letter was in my bag. The map was folded in the recipe folder. The shirt I'd ironed the night before hung from a chair like a small flag. He was still asleep when I made coffee. I moved quietly, not like a thief, but like someone who finally trusts her own footsteps. When the kettle clicked, he stirred. You're up early, he mumbled. I have orientation, I said. He rolled onto an elbow, squinting. That's today. It is. A beat. The moment where I used to offer to reschedule, to soften, to joke. I didn't fill it. He checked his phone. I put dinner on the calendar. Clients. 6 o'clock. I'll be at campus, I said. You'll do great. He smiled thin. You're cute when you're stubborn. Then I must be adorable, I said, and poured my coffee into the travel mug that said begin. Campus smelled like paper and wet leaves. I followed signs that knew more about me than I did. Welcome returning students, financial aid this way, advising room 214. In the lobby, a woman about my age held a folder against her chest like a shield. We exchanged a small conspiratorial smile that said I see you. Keep going. The advisor wore a cardigan the color of rain. Name, she asked. I said it, the version that belonged to me before anyone else's. She typed, glanced up and softened. Welcome back. But the word felt less like rewinding and more like finally arriving at the right platform. We planned a path. 2 evening classes, 1 online. Manageable. Repeatable. A way to build without breaking. Do you have support at home? she asked, the way people ask if you've packed food for a long trip. I have a kitchen table, I said. And a door that closes. She smiled. That can be enough. On the way out, I passed a bulletin board with tacked-up lives. Study groups, used books, a flyer that read "Write it down before you forget." I took a photo of the board, then of my own hands holding the map. Proof that they were allowed to carry something for me again. My phone buzzed. Remember dinner? 6 sharp. I typed and deleted 3 drafts. Can't later, this matters. Then I put the phone away. I didn't need to turn my day into a defense. At the bookstore I bought 1 pen and 1 cheap notebook, navy with thin gold letters. Begin. The clerk said, "Good choice. Some compliments are keys." By late afternoon I was home, the letter now tucked in the front pocket of my bag like it wanted to be first in line. He arrived moments after me, tie loosened, smile already shaped for other people. "Okay," he said, clapping once. "Dinner. You good to help me set up?" "No. Student stuff tonight, please." "I enrolled," I said. He missed a step. "What?" "I enrolled. 2 evening classes. I start next week." He laughed, but the sound had edges. "That's ambitious. Did you look at the numbers?" "Yes." "And the schedule?" "Yes." "And us?" "Yes," I said again, steady. "I looked at all of it. I'm still going." He exhaled, then chose the softer weapon. "Wait. You hate stress. You last 2 weeks in spiral. I'm protecting you from that." "I don't need that kind of protection anymore." The doorbell rang. He straightened. "Let's not do this now," he said through his smile. "Please? Be light tonight." I didn't say yes. I didn't say no. I opened the door. The house filled like it always did. Coats, laughter, the choreography of people who have practiced being the best versions of themselves in front of each other. He poured wine, told a story about a client who almost torpedoed a deal. I set out plates, napkins, the easy grace I used to mistake for love. At the table, someone asked me what I'd been up to. It was an ordinary question, but it was also a crossroads. I felt his hand on my knee, not unkind, just a cue. "I enrolled," I said. The room tilted, a subtle shift like a boat adjusting to new weight. "In school?" One of them asked, friendly, surprised. "Yes. Evenings. I start next week." I didn't rush. I didn't sell it. I just let the truth take up its own chair. He laughed, rehearsed, familiar. "She's trying a class. She knows her limits." I put my fork down and looked at him, then at the people who had learned to believe his version first. "I know my limits," I said. "They were never the same as yours." The woman across from me smiled, small, private, like a flame catching. He cleared his throat. "Anyway," he said to the table, "let's toast. To simple lives." I lifted my glass. "To honest ones." The room went quiet enough for utensils to sound like coins. Someone coughed. Someone laughed too loudly. The moment passed as moments do when the most uncomfortable person insists on moving on. After they left, the house exhaled. He shut the door and turned, carefully blank. "What was that?" "An answer to a question." "You embarrassed me." "No," I said. "I stopped letting you answer for me." He stepped closer, then stopped like the air had boundaries he'd never noticed. "You won't make it," he said, gentle as gravity. "You're not built for this. And when it falls apart, it lands on me." There was the oldest line in our house. A prophecy delivered as care. "If I fail," I said, "I will clean up my own mess. And if you don't? Then you'll have to learn a new line." He paced, palms out. "Why are you doing this? We were fine." "We were quiet," I said. "That's not the same." He shook his head, an impatient metronome. "You're nothing without structure. Without me you spin." I felt the words arrive, look for purchase, fail to stick. "I used to believe you," I said softly. "That was the structure." The silence that followed wasn't the old kind. It wasn't a lid. It was air. He tried one more angle. "Hey. Compromise. Defer this term. We'll revisit in the spring. After bonuses, after the real stuff." "No." He stared like I'd spoken a language he didn't recognize. "No. No," I repeated. "I'm going anyway." He laughed once, flat. "Wear comfortable shoes." "I already am." That night I didn't sleep on my side of the bed out of principle. I slept on the couch out of clarity. Not as punishment. As rehearsal. The cushions were too short, the blanket thin, the lamp bulb a little too yellow. I wrote 3 sentences in the begin notebook and tore out none of them. Enrollments confirmed. 2 shifts added. No more asking the door if it will open before turning the handle. Sometime after midnight he stood in the hallway. "You're being dramatic," he said. "I'm being awake." He sighed. "I don't know who you think you are." I closed the notebook. "Someone you'll either learn or leave." He didn't answer. He went back to bed. And for the first time in years I felt the house hold me up instead of hold me in. Morning was clearer. He poured his coffee and looked at me like I was a small storm he hoped would drift east. "I can't do this if you won't be reasonable," he said. "You can do whatever you choose," I answered. "So can I." He set the mug down too hard, the small thunder of a man who prefers his world unwrinkled. "I have a presentation," he said. "I can't think about this." "You don't have to." "I already did." He put on his jacket. At the door he hesitated, then offered the softest version of control. "You can still change your mind." "I already did," I said, and the sentence landed with a weight I could stand on. When the door closed, the apartment was honest. I made a list, not of dreams but of tasks. Confirm aid appointment, email the professor who stayed late yesterday, buy index cards, move the jar from the top shelf to the middle one because I didn't need to hide the sound of progress anymore. My phone buzzed, a calendar reminder he'd sent: dinner. Clients. I deleted it. Then I added my own. Class. Me. I stood by the window and watched the day begin without asking me to choose it. And I realized the breaking point hadn't been a fight or a speech or a dramatic exit. It was a sentence said twice, once at a kitchen sink in a whisper, once in a living room out loud. "I'm going anyway." Everything after that would be logistics. And I have always been good at logistics when I'm finally allowed to use them on my own life. The first week didn't feel like triumph. It felt like rearranging furniture in the dark, bumping shins, guessing where the couch might make more sense, trusting that morning would explain everything I couldn't see yet. Monday and Wednesday nights became campus. The hallways carried that particular echo of paper and shoes. The classrooms smelled like dry markers and old confidence. I sat in the second row, not brave enough for the first, not hidden in the last. The professor wrote 3 questions on the board and said, "Let's make a mess before we clean it up." I liked that. I copied the line into the margin and underlined "make a mess" twice. For years I had tried to be tidy about my life. Now I was letting it be true first. I was older than most of the students by a decade and a half. They scrolled between notes and notifications. I clutched my pen like an anchor. The first time I spoke, my voice surprised me, not shaky, just out of practice. The professor nodded. "Yes. Keep going." I did. After class, a girl with a backpack covered in band stickers said, "I liked what you said about showing your work." I laughed. "I'm basically all work and very little show." She said, "That's the good part." Money was math I could finally do without asking permission. I added 2 evening shifts at a small bookstore 3 stops from campus, the kind of place that stays open for people who think better at night. I shelved biographies, straightened the table of staff picks, learned the register from a man who knew every regular by name. When the door chime rang, I loved the way the bell didn't ask who I was before it let me in. I kept the jar on the middle shelf now. Loose bills, coins, a folded note that said tuition. When I added to it, the clink felt like a sentence finishing itself. Mornings were for reading. I set my phone to do not disturb and let the apartment be a library before it remembered its old roles. I made coffee in the mug that said begin, flipped the notebook open, and copied definitions I didn't want to pretend I already knew. There's a secret luxury in admitting you're a beginner. The world gets spacious again. He adjusted to my schedule the way people adjust to a draft under a door. With commentary. "How long will this phase last? Do you have to leave exactly at 6? You're not skipping dinner again, are you?" I told him where I'd be and then I was there. No debate. Just presence. On Thursdays I studied at the cafe where Danny worked. She slid a mug across to me and said, "On the house, student tax." She wore chipped black nail polish and the kind of eyeliner that looks like a decision. When she had a minute she'd sit and ask, "So, is your brain having fun?" I told her about an assignment that scared me. She said, "Good. If it doesn't scare you, it won't change you." I wrote that down too. The house felt different even when nothing looked different. I stopped narrating my day as if I were auditioning to be reasonable. If he asked how class went, I told him one sentence and didn't wait for the evaluation. If he reminded me about dinner with his clients, I said, "I won't be there," without furnishing an apology. He called it cold. It wasn't. It was room temperature truth. The first quiz came fast and mean. I froze on question 3, skipped it, circled back, got it half right. When grades posted, the score was not a headline, a quiet B. My heart did that old thing, the flinch inward, the reach for a witness to either celebrate or scold. I stood in the stairwell and let myself feel both the pinch and the pride. Then I opened my notebook and wrote, "Proof I can climb." The next quiz went better. The one after that better still. At the bookstore, an elderly woman asked if I could help her find a book about starting again when you're not 20. I led her to the shelf with memoirs. She ran a finger down the spines and said, "I'm 80. Is that too late?" "Depends," I said. "What for?" She smiled. "To be a person." We both laughed, the soft kind you feel in your ribs. When she left, she touched my forearm and said, "Good luck with your classes, dear." I never told her I hadn't mentioned school. Maybe some lives announce themselves. By the third week, I could find my classroom without thinking. I could raise my hand without rehearsing the sentence 3 times. I could say, "I don't know yet," without swallowing it like a confession. I began to like the sound of my own pencil moving at the same speed as my thoughts. The tension at home didn't explode. It evaporated into constant weather. If I came in late from the bookstore, he'd be half asleep on the couch, TV murmuring, a glass on the table like a placeholder. "I warmed dinner," he'd say, as if kindness were a voucher you redeem for permission. "Thank you," I'd answer, and eat what I needed while reading what I needed more. I stopped performing gratitude for things I didn't ask for. He tried strategy. "If you're serious," he said one morning, "postpone a term and plan properly. We'll talk to a counselor, make a spreadsheet." "I'm already in the first draft," I said. "We can edit after." He didn't like mess. I had started to trust it. A professor asked if I'd considered submitting my essay to a small journal. I said, "I don't know where to begin." She circled a line on my paper. "Begin where you surprised yourself." I walked home with that sentence in my pocket like a new set of keys. On a Sunday call, my mother asked how I was. The real kind of "how are you," the one that makes you sit down to answer. I told her I'd enrolled. There was a pause heavy with all the versions of me she'd carried in the meantime. Then she said, "I'm proud of you," and the floor felt steadier by an inch. I didn't realize I'd been measuring life in inches until they returned. There were bad days because real life insists on symmetry. I mixed up due dates once and turned in the right paper to the wrong portal. I burst into quiet tears at my kitchen table and nearly emailed the professor a novel of apologies. Instead, I sent 3 lines. "I made a mistake. Here is the correct file. Thank you for your patience." She wrote back, "Happens to every good student. See you Wednesday." I learned that competence isn't never failing. It's refusing to make failure your full name. Danny took another picture. This time I was reading at the cafe window, face in profile, city lights turning the glass into a polite mirror. When she handed me the print, I saw it immediately, not beauty, not triumph. Presence. I put it inside my notebook, not on the wall. Some reminders are better faced alone. I stopped hiding small pleasures from myself. A highlighter in a color I liked. A second-hand coat that made winter feel less like endurance. A playlist of piano tracks from the free library that sounded like rain, remembering it can be gentle. I wasn't rewarding myself for performance. I was learning to treat my life like a place I planned to stay. The jar on the shelf met its first goal. I carried it to the bank like a kid carrying a science project, nervous, proud, hoping someone would look. The teller emptied the coins into a loud machine and said, "Nice." Numbers appeared on a tiny screen. Small, then large enough to be a sentence. Next term paid. I walked out smiling at nothing, at everything, at the sidewalk for being where I needed it to be. One night, the apartment lost power for an hour. He cursed at the dark. I lit a candle and kept reading, the text a little closer to the flame. He said, "You're really doing this, aren't you?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because I want to be a person who follows through. Because I am tired of living in the polite ghost of a plan. Because I like who I am when I'm tired from work I chose." I didn't say any of that. I said, "Because I can," and turned the page. By midterm I knew the custodians by name. They locked the building with a delicate rhythm, jangling keys like applause for the last ones out. "Night, Professor," one of them teased me in the hallway. "Not yet," I said. "Student forever." And I meant it not as a sentence, as a posture. I applied for a small returning student grant with an essay that started, "I'm learning how to be visible without asking for forgiveness." When the reply came approved, I didn't scream. I forwarded it to my own inbox again just to watch it arrive twice. Then I bought a used textbook I'd been scanning in the library and an extra pack of index cards because hope is easier to carry when it has edges. He kept being himself. Lists, dinners, reminders, an orbit that assumed I was still the center that reflected his light. I kept being new. Class, shifts, pages, a gravity that had learned its own pull. We were polite planets for a while, passing close enough to nod. On the last night before break, the professor handed back final drafts with a single line penciled at the top of mine. "You have a mind that builds rooms other people want to stand in." I read it 3 times. Not because I didn't believe her, because I wanted to learn how to believe myself. I walked home in a cold, forgiving wind. The city was the same. The sidewalks were the same. The key still stuck a little in our front door. Inside, the apartment smelled like something he'd reheated and didn't eat. My notebook landed on the table with that thin, confident sound paper makes when it remembers it can be a passport. I didn't announce anything. I didn't demand recognition. I washed my hands, made tea, opened a fresh page, and wrote the simplest line I owned. "Keep going." It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't cinematic. It was maintenance of a life I was finally allowed to build. And every time I chose a sentence like that over a performance, the future moved one step closer, as if it had always been standing just outside the door, waiting for the part of me that would finally turn the handle without asking permission. Results didn't arrive like fireworks. They arrived like clean pages, plain, undeniable, waiting for my name. Midterms turned into finals the way seasons turn. Not with announcements, but with a colder wind on the walk to class and a campus that smelled like pencils. I studied in the second row, learned when to breathe before answering, learned that if I wrote the first sentence the rest often agreed to follow. The grades posted slowly over a week, one window at a time. I didn't take a screenshot. I wrote the letters down in my notebook and let them be small on purpose. Some victories work better as foundations than as headlines. At the bookstore my manager added a third shift. "You're careful," he said. "Careful people keep lights on." I shelved the new arrivals and straightened a display I had arranged myself. A pyramid of biographies under a sign that read "Start Again." Customers picked up books from the middle and ruined the symmetry. It made me strangely happy. Neatness is for shelves. Lives need fingerprints. Money stayed honest. I moved the jar to a lower shelf and stopped pretending it was secret. When it was full enough to be heavy, I took it to the bank. The coins rattled in the machine like hail. The teller counted bills into my hand and said, "Good for you." The receipt went in the notebook behind the page with my grades. Paper evidence next to paper evidence. Not to prove anything to him, but to keep promises with myself. My mother came to campus one afternoon. She wore her church coat even though it wasn't Sunday and held my arm like someone who both remembers and believes. We found my classroom, empty between lectures. She touched the edge of a desk like it might shock her. "Does it feel different?" she asked. "It feels the right size," I said. She nodded. "Good. The right size." We ate soup at a place that served it with bread thick as a doorstop. She tucked an envelope into my bag without comment. When I got home I found $20 bills and a note, "For your pencils." I cried the quiet kind of tears that don't need witnesses. At home the weather didn't improve. He asked logistical questions as if they were proof of care. "How late are you tonight? Will you be home for the client call? How much is the next term?" I answered without apologizing. 10. No. Paid. He adjusted his tone. "You don't have to be sharp with me. I'm being clear," I said. Clarity sounds like sharpness to people who are used to your softness. Small physical changes made the apartment feel slightly less borrowed. I brought home a second-hand lamp with a linen shade and set it on the table where my notebook lived. Light fell differently, a little warmer, a little more honest. I bought a plant that grew sideways and decided it was perfect. I didn't ask it to stand up straight for anyone. The advisor called me in for a 15-minute check-in that turned into an hour. "You're doing well," she said, scrolling. "Have you thought about applying for the returning student fellowship? It's small, but it's dignity money." "Dignity money," I repeated. "Money that says the work you're doing is the kind to be seen." I filled out the form that night at the kitchen table while he watched a game with the volume one notch too high. When I needed quiet, I didn't ask him to turn it down. I moved my chair closer to the lamp and turned myself up. A week later, an email arrived with a subject line that made my hands shake. "Congratulations, fellowship awarded. Stipend. A mentor." My name on a page I hadn't needed to screenshot until just then. I closed my eyes and let the relief land where fear had been living rent-free. Then I walked to the bookstore and showed the manager the email on my phone. He squinted and smiled. "You're the kind people root for," he said. "They don't always say it. But they do." On my break, I bought a pack of index cards with my own money and didn't apologize to any voice that asked if it was necessary. He found out by accident, not design. A colleague sent him a link to the department's announcement. He walked into the kitchen holding his phone the way people hold unfamiliar animals. "Someone sent me this," he said. "You didn't tell me." "I didn't forget," I said. I chose not to explain. He nodded slowly like an equation had misbehaved. "Well, congrats." "Thank you." He waited for the rest of the script, the version where I minimize, where I promise this will not change anything that matters to him. I poured tea. The kettle gave him the only answer he was going to get. The fellowship came with a small task: host a study group for other returning students on Thursday nights. The first week, 3 women showed up, one with paint on her fingers, one with an exhausted smile, one who apologized for being late and then apologized for apologizing. We sat around a table that wobbled. I folded a sugar packet under the short leg and said, "There. We can work." They laughed, the kind of laugh that makes you want to keep breathing. We made a circle of index cards and wrote down the things we were pretending not to want. Mine said, "Finish without permission." When we were done, the woman with the paint on her fingers said, "This feels like a room I could stay in." "Me too," I said and meant it. The professor who had circled lines in my essays pulled me aside after class. "I'm submitting your piece to a small journal," she said. "I haven't edited it." "I know. That's why it sounds like a person." I laughed, startled by the rush of being seen. "Also," she added, "we're looking for a teaching assistant next term. Evening section. You'd be good at it." "I'm not qualified," I said out of habit. She tilted her head. What would qualifying look like if it weren't a feeling? I had no answer, which was the point. At the bookstore, a man asked if I could recommend something for someone rebuilding their life without changing their address. I handed him a memoir with a plain cover and said, "This one doesn't tell you what to do. It reminds you you can." He nodded. That's what I needed. When he left, I wrote the line down in my notebook, not because it was wise but because it was true. He tried on a new tone, friendly, almost proud. "You're busy," he said one evening, not accusing, just observing. "I am," I said. "You seem different." "I am," I said again, smiling a little. "It looks like this." I gestured at the lamp, the plant with its sideways growth, the notebook with dog-eared pages, the calendar where class was written in ink instead of pencil. He ran a hand over his mouth. "You really think you can keep all this up?" "I don't think," I said. "I'm doing." He didn't reply. Doing is notoriously hard to argue with. The fellowship check arrived on a Tuesday in an envelope that said "Do not fold." I opened it at the mailbox because I didn't want the house to make this moment about itself. It wasn't a fortune. It was enough. Enough to pay for next term without raiding the jar. Enough to buy a pair of headphones that didn't crackle. Enough to remove one excuse from any mouth that might need one. I walked home slow and let the street hold my smile. That night I cooked a simple dinner and ate it at the table with my notes. He was on his 3rd call. He covered the mic and asked, "Can you heat something for me?" I said, "It's warm on the stove." He nodded, mouthed "Thank you," and went back to being the center of a different room. Kindness didn't feel like a currency anymore. It felt like a choice I could afford. I printed the fellowship announcement and slid it into a clear sleeve the way children slip drawings into refrigerators. I didn't post it anywhere public. I tucked it behind the begin notebook so that when I opened to the next page, it would wink like a patient witness. Evidence travels quietly. Change is what a door is. The study group grew. We learned each other's coffee orders and the names of the people we were trying not to become. On the night before midterms, the room smelled like fear and highlighters. Breathe, I said. Write the question in your own words. Then answer that. The woman who apologized for apologizing didn't apologize once. On the way out, she touched my shoulder and said, "You make it feel possible." I wrote that down too because sometimes possible is the only result that matters. The department posted a photo from our workshop, my side profile, the lamp in the background, a semicircle of women leaning forward. He saw it the way people see whether they didn't expect on someone else's screen first. "You're on the website," he said at dinner, neutral. "So I am. They called you a mentor." "Words are catching up," I said and cut my food into reasonable pieces. I didn't sleep with triumph. I slept with fatigue that felt like I'd earned it. In the morning, I woke before my alarm, made coffee and opened the notebook to a fresh page that wasn't afraid of my pen. I listed logistics, rent, shifts, reading, study group, and then added one line that wasn't a task. "I like who I am when I'm tired from work I chose." He stood in the doorway, mug in hand. "Big day?" he asked. "Normal," I said. He nodded like he was standing at the edge of a map I had drawn without him. I'm proud of you." "Thank you," I said and let the sentence land beside my own without competing. By the end of term, the numbers were indisputable. Credits earned. Grades posted. Fellowship renewed. The bookstore scheduled me for the window shift, the one where you do the display because someone trusts your eye. I arranged paperbacks like a small city and tucked a handwritten card on the shelf. "You are allowed to begin again." A woman read it, then put a book in her basket. She didn't look at me. He didn't have to. None of this was cinematic. I still missed trains, burned rice, forgot to switch the laundry and had to rewash it like penance. But the shape of my days was mine. The results were too modest to brag about and too concrete to ignore. And as they stacked, one quiet proof on another, the question that had once run my life lost its power. "Who do you think you are?" I wasn't thinking anymore. I was becoming. When the email about next term's teaching assistantship came, "We'd like to offer you the position," I read it twice and then pressed my palm to the table to feel how solid the wood was. I didn't run to tell him. I wrote the news in my notebook first, the way you write a prayer before you speak it out loud. I poured tea and stood at the window. The city moved in its practiced loops. Buses sighed. A kid dragged a trumpet case down the sidewalk like a stubborn pet. I rested my forehead against the glass and let the simple truth stand there with me. The work was working. And though I didn't know it yet, the day those results became visible to everyone else, the website photo, the class list with my name next to instructor's assistant, the email that accidentally landed in his inbox because our addresses were still linked, that would be the day the phone would buzz with a number I knew by heart and a voice rehearsing old lines in a new key. But that belongs to another chapter. For now, grades, a fellowship, a lamp that made the room honest, a plant that refused to grow straight, a jar that no longer needed hiding, a life that did not apologize for taking up space. For now, enough. It didn't happen with violins. It happened the way weather changes, a pressure you can't see until the windows fog. The department posted a photo from our workshop. My profile, the lamp in the background, a semicircle of women leaning in. They added a line under it. "Returning student fellow leads weekly study group." By noon, 3 people had tagged me. By 2, my mother had printed it. By 4, he had seen it, not from me but in a group chat where my name wasn't supposed to live. My phone buzzed while I was shelving paperbacks. Saw the site. "Congrats." I typed thank you and didn't send it. Instead, I slid beloved back into the BS and listened to the bell over the door ring for a stranger who knew exactly what aisle he needed. An hour later, another message. "Proud of you. Dinner?" I turned the screen face down and finished my shift. Pride is cheaper over text. That evening, I made tea, opened my notebook and wrote the news the way I always do, to myself first. On the next line I added, "No announcements. Live it." The phone lit up again. A call this time. I let it ring out. Silence is not a performance. Sometimes it's just scheduling. He waited a day, then came to the bookstore. I saw him through the glass, tie loosened, trying to look casual in a room that refuses costumes. He stood by new releases, touching the covers like they might touch back if he picked the right one. When he saw me, he smiled in the way people smile at a memory they hope is still true. "Hey," he said. "Hey," I said back. My voice surprised me. Not cold. Even. "You look good," he offered. "So do you. Kindness costs what you decide it does." He nodded at the window display I'd arranged. Memoirs under a handwritten card that said you are allowed to begin again. "Did you write that?" he asked. "Yes. It's very you." "It is." A quiet beat and then, "Coffee?" I checked the clock. 10 minutes until my break. "Across the street," I said. Neutral ground and bad lighting, both kinds of honesty. We sat by the window where the city kept moving whether or not we did. He talked first, work schedules, how life was busy. I let the words pass the way you let a tram pass. You feel the vibration, you don't step into the tracks. "So," he said, finally arriving at the point. "The fellowship. The photo. That's big." "It's work," I said. "And it's mine. I always knew you had it in you." "No," I said softly. "You didn't. But I do." He winced, then tried a different key. "I'm proud of you." "Thank you." He waited for the script that used to follow, the one where I minimized it, added 3 caveats, promised not to let it change dinner. When it didn't arrive, he looked down at his coffee like the answer might be in the foam. "We were good once," he said. "Maybe we could be again." "We were comfortable," I answered. Comfort and goodness look alike from a distance. He leaned back, studying me. "You're different." "I am." "Since when?" "Since I stopped asking the door if it would open before I turned the handle." He laughed once. "You always did have a way with lines." "They're not lines," I said. "They're instructions." He nodded, slow, as if my sentences now required translation. He didn't speak. "Look. I said things I shouldn't have. I didn't mean them the way they landed." "You said them the way you meant them at the time," I said. "And I believed you. That's the part I've changed." He swallowed. "Like what?" "Dreams are for weekends. You're not built for stress. You're nothing without structure. Without me you spin." The phrases sat between us like objects on a table. He touched none of them. "I was trying to protect us." "You were protecting the version of us that kept you comfortable," I said. "You mocked my dreams and then wondered why I went quiet. Quiet isn't consent. It's damage." He stared out the window, jaw set. "So that's it? No chance." "I didn't say that," I answered. "There's a chance we'll both live good lives. Maybe even better ones. Just not together." He flinched, like the word together had always been his to define. "You won't even try?" "I am trying," I said. "I'm trying at my life." The server set down our check. We both reached for it. I was faster. "I've got it," I said. "You don't have to, I know." We stood. Outside, the light had shifted, that soft hour when the city looks like it's remembering something. He walked with me to the door of the bookstore. "I miss you," he said. "I believe you. Do you miss us?" "Sometimes I miss the idea of us," I said. "But ideas don't do dishes and they don't stop you from shrinking." He looked like a man who has discovered a map but not the road. "I can change." "I hope you do," I said. "For you." He nodded, the kind of nod that happens when acceptance arrives uninvited. "You really don't need me anymore." I let the sentence hang, not cruelly, just accurately. "I needed to not need you," I said. "That's different." He opened his mouth, closed it, then reached out as if to test the air. He didn't touch me. "Some distances are worth keeping." "Goodbye," he said. "Goodbye," I answered. "Take care of the part of you that taught you to mock what you didn't understand." He blinked. "That's fair." "It's honest," I said and went back inside. He didn't stop with one try. Old patterns resist eviction. The next week he sent a photo from our wedding day, cropped like closeness could be edited in. "Miss this," the caption said. I looked at the picture, at the woman who mistook permission for love, and felt gratitude without appetite. I deleted the message and went to the study group. That night, the woman with paint on her fingers presented her draft without apologizing once. Another read a paragraph and didn't cry in the place she always cried. We clapped like a small storm. After they left, I wiped the table, straightened the wobbling leg with a folded sugar packet, and realized this too was a return to rooms that answered back. A few days later he called again. "Can we at least talk properly?" he asked. "No bookstore." Just us. Us, I repeated, tasting the word. Where? He suggested the restaurant where we'd celebrated our first promotion, his, not mine. I suggested a quiet cafe with bad chairs and good tea. We picked the cafe. He arrived early. He had always arrived early. Control likes to sit down first. I sat opposite. No menu. No performance. I've been in therapy, he said quickly, like a credential. I'm learning things. Good, I said. Learning is a life skill. He nodded. My therapist says I used to minimize. That I turned your dreams into threats. That sounds accurate. He exhaled. I'm sorry. Really. I know, I said. I accept the apology. That doesn't obligate a future. He winced. So there's nothing I can do? You can stop telling the next woman that stress is optional, I said. You can stop answering questions not asked of you. You can learn to sit in a room where someone else's ambition is the loudest sound. He looked at his hands. And you? I'm going to class, I said. And then to work. And then to a life that fits. He was quiet a long time. When he spoke again, he used my name like it might soften the landing. I loved you, he said. I believe you, I answered. I didn't always feel it. But I believe you. He nodded. If you ever change your mind, I already did, I said gently. That's how I got here. We left without promises. Outside, the sidewalk made room for both of us, the way sidewalks are generous when people finally walk in their own directions. The last time he called, it wasn't to negotiate. It was after the department announced next term's assignments and my name appeared next to teaching assistant. He didn't mention the title. He didn't mention the photo. He said simply, you were right. I didn't know you. I didn't know me either, I said. How I do. He was silent. Then, I hope it goes well. It already is. We hung up without ceremony. No ache followed. No victory lap either. Just an ordinary evening with soup and a page that still needed writing. I set the phone face down, turned on the lamp with the linen shade, and watched the plant continue to grow sideways like it understood there are many correct directions. He had returned the way old stories do, knocking, rehearsing, asking to be let back in. I had returned too to the part of myself that didn't require an audience to be real. And if he ever walks past the bookstore window and sees me at the display, arranging paperbacks into a small city with streets that go where I choose, I hope he feels something kinder than regret. I hope he learns what I learned. Mocked dreams don't die. They wait. And if you stop talking over them long enough, they stand up, and so do you. The night after the last call, nothing dramatic happened. No shaking hands. No replaying every sentence for hidden codes. I brewed tea, turned on the linen shade lamp, and watched the plant by the window keep growing the wrong way and getting it right. I thought about the word closure. For a long time I believed it was a door someone else had to shut for me, an apology, a confession, a perfect conversation where all the corners lined up. But closure, I've learned, is when the story can sit beside you and you don't climb back into it. It's when memory loses its power to negotiate your future. I opened the Begin notebook. The early pages were written like someone asking permission. The middle ones like someone building scaffolding. The latest like a person who trusts her own handwriting. I flipped back to the first line I had written on the first clean page months ago. Make it real. Under it I wrote, I did. The apartment sounded honest, the hum of the fridge, the soft traffic, the tiny tick of a clock that used to scold me and now simply kept time. I looked around at the small things that stayed. The lamp, the sideways plant, the jar that no longer hid, the calendar with class in ink. None of it was proof for anyone. It was evidence for me that a life can become itself without asking the old life for references. He had returned the way old weather does, a change in pressure, a voice rehearsed in another room. He left again like weather too, a front that passed, leaving the air clearer. I didn't celebrate. I didn't mourn. I did the dishes, set tomorrow's book in my bag, and put a folded index card by the door that said keys, because that's who I am now. Someone who writes her way forward. The next morning I stood at the window with coffee and watched the city loosen into itself. Buses sighed. A child dragged a trumpet case. A woman jogged by in a red hat I wanted to compliment and didn't need to. I thought about all the versions of me that had done their jobs. The one who smiled to keep the room smooth. The one who wrote plans in the margins and hid them like contraband, the one who whispered I'm going anyway to a dark kitchen. None of them were wrong. They were bridges. At the bookstore I adjusted the display. The handwritten card "You are allowed to begin again" leaned a little to the left. I fixed it, then left it imperfect on purpose. A woman paused, read the card, and slid a memoir into her basket. She didn't look at me, but we shared the oldest human agreement. I see you choosing. In the classroom that night, my professor returned essays with a pencil note on mine. Your clarity makes room. I felt it land where old doubts used to live. During break, a student from the back row asked how to speak without apologizing first. Say the sentence, I told her, and then let silence do its job. We smiled, a quiet conspiracy among beginners. The study group met as usual, wobbly table, sugar, packet shim, the same 3 women plus a 4th who arrived late and said, I almost didn't come. We made our circle of index cards. On mine I wrote nothing new, just the oldest truth wearing its newest face. Keep going. When we finished, the woman with paint on her fingers said, I didn't cry in the part one always cry. Someone clapped. Someone else said, that counts. We stacked chairs, rinsed mugs, turned off the lights. Closure can look exactly like locking a room you plan to use again tomorrow. My mother called on the walk home. How does it feel? She asked, meaning everything at once. Right-sized, I said, borrowing my own line from the day she visited. She laughed softly. Then keep it that size even when people bring measuring tapes. At the corner I waited for the light, wind lifting the edges of the fellowship letter in my bag. I thought about dignity money, how a small check can be a large sentence. You are worth writing down. I didn't plan the rest of my life at that intersection. I planned tomorrow. Class at 6, study group at 8, window shift on Saturday, soup with my mother Sunday, a blank page Monday I was no longer afraid to meet. At home I placed a new card on the refrigerator, next to shopping lists and office hours. Not lines. Instructions. A reminder to myself that the phrases I repeat, I'm going anyway, keep going, begin, aren't decorations. They are the rails I built where there wasn't a road. Sometimes I think about the wedding photo he sent, the cropped closeness, how convincingly it lied. I don't hate it. I'm grateful for the woman in that picture. She kept walking even when the path looked like a circle. I keep her near the back of a drawer, not as a warning, not as a shrine, but as proof that love changes shape and still counts as love when it finally turns inward. Will he change? Maybe. I hope so. Not because it would rewrite us, but because the world is kinder when people learn to stop calling other people's dreams hobbies. I don't require redemption arcs from anyone to proceed with my day. I require breakfast, a pencil, and enough quiet to hear myself think. On the last page of the Begin notebook, where some people write conclusions, I wrote logistics. Reading list, grant deadline, evening section confirmed. Then below the line, not centered, not dramatic, just true, he mocked my dreams. Now I'm living them. I closed the cover and put the notebook on the table. The lamp warmed the room the way honesty does, not brighter than necessary, just enough to see what's there. Outside, the plant kept choosing its own direction. I stopped turning it toward the window. It already knew where the light was. Before bed, I stood in the doorway and looked at the shape of the life I stand in now. Books stacked like small cities, a calendar filled with things I chose, a jar that sounds like progress when it moves, a woman who sleeps without negotiating with the past. Closure didn't arrive with a bang. It arrived with a calendar reminder I wrote to myself. Class. Me. With a voice that doesn't reach for permission slips. With a day that keeps not needing his opinion to start. If he walks past the bookstore window someday and sees my reflection arranging a new display, he might think of a line he used to say. I hope he hears it differently. I hope I never hear it again. And when people ask how I did it, I won't give them a miracle. I'll give them a sentence. I stopped asking the door if it would open and I turned the handle. Sometimes it sticks. Sometimes it swings. Either way, you learn your strength. I turned off the lamp. The room kept its shape in the dark. Sleep came easy, not because nothing hurt anymore, but because hurt had nothing left to negotiate. He mocked my dreams. Now I'm living them without him and without apology. You've been listening to Moonlight Confessions. Not fiction, just pain turned into power.